They're reading glasses because I can't see the screen anymore. They have some weird, like a blue blocker polarization, something or other, that does look a little odd. And Knightley he just won't stop commenting on it. It can be a little cutting, but it's just his way. I needed to talk about Vertigo. I really need to talk about this in a big way. Because this is a big thing for me. Vertigo just announced that they are going to do Vertigo's coming back, and fuck it, I'll just read the thing from their website. Alright, June 7th, that's yesterday. Burbank, California. DC Entertainment is celebrating 25 years of graphic storytelling with a line-wide relaunch and rebranding, returning to where it all began with DC Vertigo. Following the news of Neil Gaiman curated Sandman Universe imprint, DC... Oh wow, is that what it's going to be called? Okay, whatever. DC Vertigo will continue to expand its slate with 7 new series from bold voices across various entertainment backgrounds, including novels, games, television, comics, and more. The relaunch is helmed by Mark Doyle, who returned to DC Vertigo last year after oversight of Batman under his leadership. DC Vertigo editorial is rededicating its focus to creating modern, socially relevant, high-concept, inventive stories appealing to readers of all genres. And I am a huge Vertigo fan, so I was back in the day, and I read all this, and boy, I'll tell you what, a lot of red flags went off. I started seeing red flags in the periphery of my vision. I started hearing alarms in the back of my head, and I am greatly concerned because about half of what I just read is not true. Vertigo started in 1993. Originally, it was just DC Comics. They created their own imprint for mature readers, and here's why. For a little while, DC had been doing a couple series that wouldn't meet Comics Code approval. So they just slapped a mature logo on it, this little logo that said, hey, this is for mature readers only, kind of a little warning, and just sold them that way. And the thing is, what happened was in 1993 when this started, it was early in 1993 if I recall, 25 years ago, what was happening there is that prior to this, comics were a supermarket thing. You'd go to the grocery store, wherever, magazines were sold, and that's where you'd get your comic books. And you couldn't sell them there unless you were Comics Code approved. But what had been happening is with underground comics, alternative comics, and so on, is that over the previous decade, specialized comic book stores had just exploded onto the scene. So suddenly you didn't need that Comics Code approval anymore. You could just sell them directly to the customer. And DC's kind of saw a market there. It already had a whole bunch of adult titles anyway, so why not make a specialized title specifically for adults, for mature audience? While this was happening, Disney was having... This requires explanation. Disney movies in the 1990s, had a sort of sub-studio called Touchstone, where they could put their more mature adult content, because Disney was, at the time, worried about preserving their brand as family-friendly Disney films and so on. My goodness, how times have changed. They had the same idea of doing something similar. Disney's had, a comic book imprint, Donald Duck. I mean, dear God, Uncle Scrooge has been around since forever. Forever, 40 is forever. But they kind of had this idea to make Touchstone Comics, something like that. Touchstone Publications, Touchstone Comics, kind of their adult, mature version. And they had a bunch of these titles that they were going to release. Instead, they were picked up by DC Vertigo. In fact, they were some of the first titles to be official titles. Stepping back a second, when Vertigo launched, a number of the titles that fell under it had already been out for a while. Sandman was already in the 40s somewhere, so it had been around for 3 years. Hellblazer had been around Constantine Hellblazer had been around for a while. Swamp Thing, likewise. What else? There were a few others. But anyway, there were titles, Doom Patrol can't forget Doom Patrol. And they switched over to the DC logo, and then they started creating titles specifically for Vertigo. The first comic to be released specifically under the Vertigo title, I believe, was Death, the High Cost of Living, one of the Sandman characters by Neil Gaiman. They also released Black Orchid, and then a number of what were going to be the Touchstone titles: Enigma, Shadow Falls, Mercy, Sebastian O. Now, the reason Vertigo exists at all, the Touchstone and the DC Vertigo side of this, in 1993 was specifically to market to adult persons. And in fact, to have very edgy, counterculture, mature, and very weird stories. 93, so this was like my second year in college. And I love this shit. I love the fuck out of it. Like, I am a huge Vertigo fan, but Vertigo from back in the day. The thing is, when Vertigo started, one, it was for adults. Two, Karen Berger got a whole bunch of veteran UK writers, like people who had been in the business for a while, who had well established themselves. I mean, Neil Gaiman had already, was well into Sandman, but prior to that, he'd done Miracle Man, Black Orchid, all sorts of other stuff. The Geek. I forgot about the Geek for a second. Yeah, Geek. God, it's like this is such a trip down memory lane right now. It's unreal, if you could see inside my head. So, these were all expert writers. I mean, these were guys who cut their teeth in comics decades before, in some cases really long. You had Grant Morrison, you had Peter Milligan, God, with Shade the Changing Man, one of my favorite comics. Like I said, Neil Gaiman had done quite a bit of work there. It just gotten a bunch of these, kind of the UK invasion. What had happened at the time was that Disney had the Disney implosion of 91, where Disney wasn't doing very well. They gave up their adult titles to Vertigo. Vertigo ran with them. And some of them, like Enigma in particular, were some of the best shit to this day, I've ever read. I want that back. What happened over time was Mike Carey was a huge writer. It was probably the last Vertigo writer I cared about. He did Lucifer, which I loved. I loved his version of Lucifer, which I think the TV show is very loosely based on. But also, he also did the Midnight one. What was that called? Crossing Midnight. God, I love that one. And both of those series went on for a long-ass time. Sandman kind of lived on for a while with House of Secrets or House of Mysteries, whatever it was called, which was kind of some of the Sandman characters still knocking it around while Neil Gaiman was out writing novels and doing TV shows and movies. So, obviously, this is stuff that is very near and dear to my heart. This is when I had been well on my way to enjoying comics. I had since I was a kid, but then these adult, fucking weird, violent, sexual comics came out, and I just, was my first year in college, and I fucking loved every damn one of them. So let's be clear on this. I want to be fair. I want to be absolutely fair. When it was announced Neil Gaiman was doing the Sandman universe imprint, where there was going to be a whole bunch of stories set in the Sandman universe, I was thrilled. I was unabashedly thrilled. I know, realistically, I'm probably not going to love all of them. I might not even like most of them. But I will appreciate the efforts of these to recreate some of that nostalgia, to maybe go in some new places with some old characters, maybe introduce some new characters in the same universe. I'm all down for that. But this DC Vertigo launch is making me really, I don't feel good about it. And I want to keep reading why. I'm told there's 7 new titles here. Briefly going down this. What happened to me in DC Vertigo? Well, what happened was the Mike Carey stories, which I loved, eventually ended. And there was nothing to pick up the slack. There was no ongoing series that I cared about. I've heard Fables is really good. I really wasn't prepared to get into it. Nothing else looked good, and everything else was very short and didn't seem very good. Like, I'd read the first couple issues of a comic by Vertigo, and I didn't care for them. They didn't capture me. I thought they were... this is so hard to explain. Vertigo had... it was pretentious. It really was. Some of them were very pretentious in the 90s. But they also had a style to them. It wasn't a flash with no substance. They were fantastically well written in some cases. And the art was always awesome. At least initially. For the time, the art was fan-fucking-tastic, and some of it holds up very well today, despite as much as technology in comics and printing has changed. But over time, there weren't any stories. No one I really liked was writing any Vertigo comics anymore. So it just kind of fell out. I was like, these really aren't very interesting to me. So I flat out stopped reading comics. And I tried so hard to get back into comics. When Justice League Dark came out, more recently, a few years back, and I heard Peter Milligan's writing it, I'm like, fuck yeah, let's give that a try. Shade the Changing Man is in it. Zatanna, Constantine, this is most of the Vertigo crew. Let's go with this. And it was good, but then Milligan left. His character literally just walks off panel, Shade, and it just wasn't that. It wasn't all that anymore, and I stopped. So welcome to today, where there are these new Vertigo titles, and the thing is, going through this announcement, with series from bold voices from across many entertainment backgrounds, games, television. I don't want comics written by TV writers or game writers. I want comics written by veteran comic book writers. That's what I liked about Vertigo in the first place. These people weren't tyros by any means. Let's continue. Relaunch. Readers of all genres. Something about that this just makes me really, really anxious. Focus on the socially relevant thing. It's 2018. When someone says they're going to make something socially relevant, I am very nervous about it. Because I feel like they want me to pay them to have them lecture me. And I hate that shit so much. I mean, that's really what it boils down to. Okay. Why does socially relevant seem like a scary phrase to me in regards to DC Vertigo? I think I have a kind of a paradigm here. Let's try this. Imagine you have two friends, and both of them have been to a wedding over the weekend. You didn't know that, and you didn't know both of them went. You happen to run into one of them, and you go, "Hey, dude, where have you been this weekend?" He says, "Hey, I was at a wedding. It was a really nice wedding. It was cool. I had a good time." I go, and you just ask him questions about it, chit-chatting, and at some point it goes like, "Well, what did the bride look like?" And it's like, "Oh, it was two dudes, so there was no bride. The two grooms, they both look fine. They look good. It was a good time. Blah, blah, blah." That's how your one friend reacts to a gay wedding. You have another friend who went to the same wedding, but you didn't know that. You ask them, "Hey, where were you this weekend?" And they say, "Oh, I was at a gay wedding, and I very approve of their lifestyle because I feel very honored to go to progressive events like this." It makes me feel like one of these people is actually comfortably tolerant, and the other isn't. And I was thinking about this. Why? Because one of them just demonstrated that it's a gay wedding. Who cares? It's 2018. If two dudes get married, good. Good for them. It was a great wedding. I had a great time. The other person who has to declare that gay weddings are good, that they're not just people, that this has to be that everything has to be politicized, and what's more, they have to point out that they approve of it, somehow turning it around and making them about themselves. It's showing versus demonstrating. Showing that you are enlightened and tolerant versus saying it. And I am very suspicious of the latter while being more convinced by the former. These new titles seem to be going out of their way to tell me how forward-thinking and socially relevant they are. That was a thing that was right in there. These are socially relevant. When I read Vertigo in 1993, there had already been lesbian characters and a transgender character in Sandman. In fact, that was in the first 8 issues, I believe. Yes, the first 8 issues of Sandman. Sebastian O was openly bisexual and into all sorts of stuff. His friend George was a lesbian. Enigma, spoilers for a comic that's 25 freaking years old. The last couple issues have a lot of homoerotic imagery, and that's actually the crux of the story. That's how the story finishes up. If you haven't read Enigma, by the way, do. It's one of the best ones, and it's only 8 issues long, and you can get it in a trade paperback. It's fantastic. But my point is, none of these were sold as, look how forward-thinking and socially aware we are. Look, it's Enigma, the gay superhero. They didn't tell me that they were enlightened or tolerant or accepting or any of this. They just wrote really good stories that just happened to have characters that were diverse and had different sexualities and so on. Once again, demonstrating something versus telling me about it. Don't tell me how accepting and so on you are. Show me. Demonstrate it. I mean, it was almost as... It's almost as though who you are, your sexuality, your identity, doesn't have to be a big production. We don't have to draw attention to it. You're just a person, regardless of who you are. How crazy is that? Going through these, we have Border Town. When a crack in the border between worlds releases an army of monsters from Mexican folklore into a small town of Devil's Fork, Arizona. The residents blame the ensuing weirdness, shared nightmares, otherworldly radio transmissions, mysterious goat mutilations on, quote, goddang illegals. With racial tensions supernaturally charged, it's up to the new kid, Frank Dominguez, and a motley crew of high school misfits to discover what's really going on. This looks like shit. Once again, it's not, I've got this cool story to tell. It's, look how relevant it is that there are racial tensions in 2018. And I am going to go way out of my way to demonstrate which side of that I'm on. And for that matter, there's no question, there's no moral ambiguity, no gray lines here. We know who the good guys are, we know who the bad guys are, without knowing a single character other than the main one. We don't know anyone's name, we know where everyone is standing. That sounds boring to me, but maybe it's amazing. We'll see. Hexwives by Ben Blacker. The women are too powerful, they must be tamed. Which sounds like a lot of porn I saw coming out of the 50s and 60s, but whatever. Women are too powerful, they must be tamed. A malevolent conspiracy of men brainwashes a coven of witches to be subservient, suburban housewives. But it's only a matter of time before the women remember their power. One of the tricks to social commentary is to avoid being too on the nose, because then you sound obvious and really weak and kind of lame. Are you fucking with me? It's like, god damn it, that sounds like it's going to be a lecture. Anything that sounds like you're lecturing at me sounds bad. But this sounds like it's going to be a lecture. It sounds like it's going to be a boring lecture. You've got people with magical powers, and you're already making this sound weak. American Carnage. It is a thrilling crime saga. Disgraced FBI agent Richard Wright, who is biracial but can pass for white. goes undercover in a white supremacist group believed to be responsible for the death of a fellow agent. To be fair, DC Vertigo, this doesn't sound like a DC Vertigo title, but DC Vertigo did do titles like that. They did biographies and all sorts of weirdness. Northlanders and all sorts of stuff that was off, that were off stories, that were really cool, different stories. Once again, this sounds potentially interesting, but I mean, once again, do we have to focus so much on every single person's race? That had better not be your whole story. You had better have an awful lot more. And white supremacist as the bad guy? I mean, these all sound really edgy for the 1970s. Oh, look, according to my computer's clock, it is 2018. This shit isn't edgy anymore. This isn't... whatever. Moving on. I don't have a good feeling about any title I've seen so far. Goddess Mode by Zoe Quinn. Oh, Lord. Featured in People's 25 Women Who Are Changing the World and Forbes 30 Under 30. So don't tell me about her writing credentials by all means. Which... And Zoe Quinn, if I'm not mistaken, she's a computer person. So this is one of our other media, computer games persons. Okay. In a future where all of humanity's needs are administered by a godlike AI. It's one young woman's horrible job to do tech support on it. When Cassandra finds herself violently drawn into a hidden and deadly digital world beneath our own, she discovers a group of superpowered women and horrific monsters locked in a secret war for the cheat codes to reality. Are all the characters women? That doesn't seem very inclusive. But I've got like such a bad feeling that's just going to be feminist with a Y. Which should... God damn it. I don't even care how preachy you are. I don't even care too much how preachy you are, as long as you're telling me a good story, and this is not a comic book writer. This is a person who wrote a game that I've never heard of. This is just... God, this is just not sounding great. Okay, quit bitching about it. Continue. High level. Hundreds of years after the world ended, human society was rebuilt from scratch. A self-interested smuggler with a price on her head is forced to traverse a new continent of danger and mystery, delve into a mystery to deliver a child messiah to High Level, a mythical city on top of the world from which no one has ever returned. That actually sounds perfectly fine. That sounds like a Vertigo. Finally, we found something that might be a Vertigo title. I really liked, like I said, I like Children's Crusade, so I like the way I like the crossovers. Vertigo doesn't always, with its separate stuff, doesn't lend itself to crossovers very much. I know that Children's Crusade was a crossover. I don't think, was there another? I don't think there was. Oh, well, that's a shame. But let's see. So that doesn't sound good. I'm gonna... Okay, well, we'll get into this. Let's keep going. Safe Sex. A dystopian sci-fi thriller about a ragtag team of sex workers fighting for the freedom to love in a world where sexual pleasure is monitored, regulated, and policed by the government. None of the writers have not actually written anything. They're journalist lecturers on sexual education and activism. This has the potential to be hugely lame. Oh, this has the potential to be so bad. Okay, continuing. Second Coming. So Mark Russell actually wrote comics. Well, there's a twist. God sends Jesus to Earth in hopes that he will learn the family trade from Sunman, an all-powerful superhero, who is like the varsity quarterback son God never had, but upon his return, Christ is appalled to discover what has become of his gospel and vows to set the record right. Okay. briefly, my thoughts on this. This is going to be a long one, and I can't do anything about that. Briefly, I think these sound not very encouraging. I am very worried about the direction these are going in. This isn't what I want. This isn't what I wanted, but what I think I'm going to do is I'm actually going to give each of these a try. There are only 7 of them. It looks like, if I'm reading this right, some of these are going to debut in 2019, which is not in time for the 25th anniversary. Okay, kicking off 20 Years of Vertigo, a monthly series. I'm going to try these. It looks like they're pretty spread out. I'm going to give them a shot. I'm going to actually read at least 1 issue of each of these. They're only $4 each. What the fuck? So, and I'm going to review them, because God knows I need more stuff to review. Anyway, and I want to be fair. I hope that I can be fair with these. I'm going to be strict with them. I've seen really good stuff from Vertigo. If these aren't good, I'm going to say so. But I'd like to give this a try. I'd like to try to do a thing where I am a humongous Vertigo fan. I was with it through thick and thin for a long-ass time. So they want to bring Vertigo back. I'm going to talk about it. And I'm going to give this a fair shake. I am going to actually try to review these in a fair way. And if they're good, I'll say they're good. If they're not, I'm going to say this sucks. Anyway, that's all for me. I got stuff I